Hi, my name is Liam Arney, welcome back to Orangesicle, and today we're going to be talking about, reviewing, and analyzing A Streetcar Named Desire by Tennessee Williams. On December 3rd, 1947, Tennessee Williams' play A Streetcar Named Desire premiered on Broadway. The play tells the story of a woman named Blanche Dubois, a seemingly Southern belle who travels from the town of Laurel to visit her sister Stella in New Orleans. Blanche, escaping trouble in her hometown, falls into an altercation with her sister's husband, Stanley, who suspects that Blanche is hiding something about her former life. As the story unravels, Blanche loses her grip on the illusions that formed her reality, and we watch her slowly spiral. Thomas Lanier Williams III, although better known by his pen name Tennessee Williams, was an American playwright and screenwriter. Along with the contemporaries of Eugene O'Neill and Arthur Miller, he is considered among the three foremost playwrights of the 20th century American drama. A Streetcar is arguably, though, Williams' most famous and influential work, standing against the tests of time. Williams had a rougher upbringing, however, with an abusive father and a resentful mother. His father was once said to have been described as a man's man who loved to gamble and drink. People believe Tennessee Williams' father to be the inspiration behind Stanley Kowalski's character in A Streetcar, but nothing's for sure. Now, the Williams family had lived out in the country for the earlier part of Tennessee Williams' life, but the family had moved to a crowded low-rent apartment in St. Louis after his father obtained a position in a shoe factory, thus also leading to speculation of inspiration behind the themes of the New and Old South in Streetcar. Williams suffered from depression and alcoholism for much of his life, and was also thought to be suffering from hypochondria. It was also highly speculated and an open secret that he was homosexual. Many of his short stories and plays deal with gay themes directly, though rarely in a positive light. His life wasn't a very happy one from what is gathered about him, and that can be reflected in his plays and his characters. Personally, though, I don't really think that's always a bad thing. I don't know. There's something real that I get from his writing style, and I do appreciate it a lot. But to each their own, but I just think there's a lot of merit to his work, in his writing, and his influences. There are three main characters in A Streetcar Named Desire: Blanche Dubois, Stella Kowalski, and Stanley Kowalski. Blanche's inspiration of a character seems to be driven from the dying culture of the wealthy social class of plantation owners and Southern belles in the early 20th century Southern United States. She is faced with a jarring culture clash and is given a fish-out-of-water conflict very early on. Learning Blanche's past, we can see she tries to take forth a persona from this passing era to try to gain similar respect and social privilege, but alas, this doesn't work for long, and not a second with Stanley. Blanche's constant disapproval to Stanley, to the audience, and to Stella can be seen as disapproval to the New South, this new culture and new generation that has taken the place of her previous era she had grown used to. But Blanche, as a character, goes much deeper than any of this. Her persona becomes less of an act she portrays for the sake of others' opinions, and more of an illusion she creates to delude herself from the person she has become. She has strayed far from the path of a Southern dame, which bears the question of how different is she really from Stella and Stanley, and does most of her disdain from them and the New South come from disdain for herself? Blanche, we come to find, after the death of her young husband, bears a sort of guilt and trauma from it. It's clear that she had some sort of homophobia within her, but one can only wonder if this event led her to see herself as not good enough, or as not enough of a woman to please a man, per se. We've all heard of some sort of joke along the lines of them dating turned him gay, but this event happened to Blanche, and she's dealing from the backlash and withdrawals from that event. And this is maybe why she had all of those sexual encounters at the Flamingo Hotel and a sexual deviant relationship with a student. And again in front of us with a paperboy, with her even commenting that she needs to stay away from younger men. Her reasoning for many of her encounters I don't think can be easily explained, and even though she does seem to continuously fall victim to this type of behavior, I don't think she actually likes what she's doing or does. I think Blanche really wants to fall in love and be a married woman, but the gaping tragedy of her young husband still leaves her struggling to find love and validation. Even with years in the grave, her young husband still has a hold on her. Blanche is not a good person. Stella's character can be assumed to be inspired from William's own mother, but there's no real ties that make this seem likely. But inspiration aside, Stella is a character who represents the modern Southern culture and the modern woman of the 1940s living in the southern states of the United States. Stella is a woman who is affected by fragile femininity. Even at the most disagreements, she sides with her husband and forgives him. She willingly looks past every red flag in sight in fear of what she might find if she truly acknowledges them. Stella is a weak person. She also lives in a society, however, that doesn't allow her to have too much strength to begin with. She does her part to keep things together and keep the household functioning over the course of Blanche's stay to the best of her abilities, but she willingly allows for Stanley to overpower her. Nothing cements this more and cements her as a character more than the ending of A Streetcar. When finally forced to pick a side of her own sister or her husband, she chooses her husband in disbelief that he could commit such vile acts. She chooses this ignorance and rather chooses to believe that her own sister has lost her own mind completely than even entertain the idea that her husband, Stanley, maybe was in a situation she should have needed to run from. Stella is not a good person. As stated before and previously mentioned, people speculate that Stanley's inspirations was from William's own father. Stanley is a man drenched in toxic masculinity and sexism, oftentimes being described as and being shown as animalistic, slobbering, sweating, smoking, drinking. He throws punches, raises his voice into yells and shouts, and makes love whenever he deems appropriate. This depiction is so strong, he is almost always shown eating or talking with food in his mouth in the film. Stanley, however animalistic he is presented, is still a person with thoughts and feelings, of course. He gets clearly hurt and offended by Blanche's belittling remarks towards him, and presents clear annoyance and irritation to Blanche's questioning of his authority. Being a straight white man in America in the 1940s was probably never questioned by a woman to begin with. It's clear these things make him feel incompetent, small, and weak, and so he acts out in violence and rampage, lashing out, deciding to commit irredeemable acts in order to make a point to someone else or simply himself. Stanley is not a good person. The time and place factors the main social situations and conflicts of the play. A Streetcar Named Desire takes place in the 1940s in New Orleans in the deep south of the United States. After the turn of the century, the South and the country in general have been beaten by conflict after conflict, a civil war, an economic depression, and 2 world wars. And so, a new South was emerging. The previous South of plantations, high society, and Southern belles slowly faded in favor of the also emerging middle class in the southern United States. Now, despite William's controversial story, it was well-reviewed and very successful. Definitely successful enough for a film adaptation. And in 1951, that adaptation became a real motion picture on the silver screen. The actors used were pulled from the original cast of the Broadway production, with the exception of Jessica Tandy as Blanche, who was replaced with Vivien Leigh, an already established movie star of the time in hopes to garner a larger audience. Which, personally, I think maybe was not a fair move, but Vivien Leigh does a phenomenal job as Blanche that it personally makes it up for me. Some other actresses who played Blanche on the stage was Melina Mercuri in the first adaptation and Tallulah Bankhead, just to name a few. But roles were not the only things changed or tampered with. If you know bits and pieces of old Hollywood and old movie facts, I'm sure you've heard the term the production code. I'm sure it's passed by you at some point. This code ensured that no acts of violence, racial integration, sexual acts of deviancy and or perversion, sexuality, or drug use could be depicted. In a basic sense, it was just pretty much that era's version of a censorship. However, the rules were a little flawed, and the judgment was also very flawed in what could be depicted and what could not. For most of the time that this code was in effect, it was enforced by the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America, specifically this guy, Joseph Green. Any film that was released in the United States needed this man's seal of approval before it could be distributed. Aaron Williams, taking on this adaptation project, knew from the beginning that parts of A Streetcar simply would not hold up to the code's scrutiny. So, with collaboration to alter some of the play's plot points and script, the MPAA alerted Warner Brothers to a couple of principal problems already catching their attention. First, it was what Green called an inference of sexual perversion. In the play, Blanche catches her young husband in bed with another man, and he commits suicide after she tells him one night that he disgusted her for this reason. This was a big no-no in the code, so instead they substituted her direct homophobia with a sort of coded vague criticism.
Unable to stop myself, I said, "You're weak. I've lost respect for you. I despise you."
However, these were not law-by-law events, and again decided by one man, so there were times when some of these disclosed scenes could be shown if The movie would not show that they endorsed that type of behavior, so these characters could not be shown getting a happy ending for themselves or any parties involved. Usually scenes of adultery/cheating on a spouse was commonly excused, and its punishment was usually an off-screen death or an arrest. But for Stanley's case, he couldn't be shown getting away with what he had done to Blanche, which is why we get this extreme deviation of Stella leaving Stanley in the end of the film.
Come on, honey.
You touch me. Don't you ever touch me again.
Stella! Come on, Stella!
I'm not going back in there again. Not this time. Never going back. Never.
Hey, Stella!
The three main themes that A Streetcar Named Desire shows to us is the Old South versus the New South, sexism, and fantasy versus reality. The most blaring theme is the old way of living versus the new way. This new generation, new way of life, middle and working class, taking over their previous lifestyle of high society, southern belles, plantations, and wealthy families. Blanche represents the Old South, while Stanley is the opposite and represents the new. Stella, being the character that has lived in both, has to make the decision of which South she will be a part of. Listening to Blanche and going back to the previous life of the vanishing old, or assimilating to the new working South and leaving all of that behind to go with Stanley. Ultimately choosing Stanley and the new South. This also kind of gives us the message that the new generation and new ways of living will always take front of the previous one, in a way making the story feel timeless in that aspect. It's a conflict that many of us deal with, the old versus the new, and the old eventually going away and the new eventually coming forward. The entire play is rooted with the very old-fashioned mindset of what men and women were supposed to be and act like. Characters like Stanley, Mitch, and their poker friends reek of toxic masculinity and an expected authority, while Stella, Blanche, and other female characters are shown to be at constant odds and struggling with this unbalanced social dynamic, causing most of the issues and escalating conflict throughout the entire story. And lastly, although Williams' protagonist in A Streetcar Named Desire is the romantic Blanche Dubois, the play is a work of social realism. Blanche explains to Mitch that she fibs because she refuses to accept the hand that fate has dealt her. Lying to herself and to others allows her to make her life appear as it should be, rather better than what it is, more respectable than what it actually is. Stanley, a practical man, firmly grounded in the physical world, disclaims Blanche's fabrications and does everything he can to unravel them. Now, some of the main and probably obvious symbols that you've probably noticed and realized while seeing the play or reading the script is some symbols throughout the play make constant appearances. One is alcohol, showing an escape from the reality that the characters are currently in. A similar one that doesn't have too much attention but really sticks out, especially if you watch the play, is the Chinese lantern Blanche puts over the lamp, covering a very basic and modern object with a disguise, something pretty, creating a veil of illusion. Now, overall, my final thoughts on A Streetcar Named Desire. So, as you probably have been able to tell, I have been looking at bullet points for this one, but now I'm just going off the top of my head. Whew. In all seriousness, when I first finished A Streetcar, I actually really didn't like it. I was, just based entertainment-wise, it was really unsatisfying at the very end. And by the end of it, I didn't really like or root for anyone anymore. I did mention that the three main characters of Blanche, Stella, and Stanley, I didn't think that any of them are good people, and I still don't think that any of them are really good people. But the more I have to analyze the script, and the more I had to analyze them as characters and people, the more I guess respected it, and respected them, if that makes sense. There's something, I guess, weirdly appealing about how morally gray all of them are. They all have made some really bad decisions, but at the same time, they've all done stuff that, well, at a certain point in the play, at a certain point in the script, I did, and I was rooting for them. I guess I appreciate how real that they feel, how real some of these actions seem, how Tennessee Williams doesn't shy away from the fact that they're not good people, but that's kind of the point. They're not good people, and they've made bad decisions, and we get to see and we get to experience the outcomes of these decisions. We get to see how Blanche handles her situation, and how she handles facing away from reality. We get to see how Stanley has to bear with and handle the effects of toxic masculinity in this era. We get to see and experience how Stella experiences everything that goes on around her and the choices that she makes, the choices of embracing a new South and the choices of embracing her husband or her sister. I don't know if any of that made sense, but there's just something pretty endearing, I guess, about these characters. It's something that, again, after I read it for the first time, I just was really unhappy with all the characters, but now looking back on it, especially having done this project and having to research them and analyze them, I just weirdly like them. I guess it's because, I don't know, I guess I understand them in a weird way. I have a weird mix of pity and empathy for them, but I understand some aspects of them. The bad decisions, the bad parts of them, but the good parts of them. I don't know. I'm a person who just really likes characters, and I'm a person who really enjoys character studies. So maybe that's why I appreciate it more. If you don't already know, I am a theater kid, and so I have had to analyze scripts and characters before to portray a certain character or portray a certain story. So, I don't know. I guess I just appreciate this on a whole different type of level. But my final review of the entire script is, if you haven't read it, I definitely think you should. Now, I mentioned before that this really does still stand against, like, the... Ooh, hold on, what did I say? Now, I did say before that this script really stands against the tests of time, but I really think that it does. It's a really good story, and again, parts of it with this old generation and the new generation and these characters, a part of it sort of seems a little timeless. Obviously not because of the big historical effects that it has and that influences the story, but I really do enjoy the script, and it's not going to hurt to read it. There's also some good links on YouTube that I found. There's this one really specific one that I found, this really good recording by the Shelton Theater. They did it and performed it in 2016. That was really good. But like 3 days after I watched it, they took it down and blocked it in every country, so I didn't really appreciate that. That was a little disrespectful. But there are good recordings on YouTube. I am going to say, though, to be cautious of the movie because it's not extremely accurate to what the script is and what I think it's supposed to be trying to portray with it. But, yeah, thank you so much for tuning in with me, and this is my review, analysis, and mumbo-jumbo of A Streetcar Named Desire. Thank you so much.